December 29th, 1989. Frostbitten people in the completely filled third courtyard of Prague Castle enthusiastically applaud the newly elected president of the Czechoslovak Socialist Republic. It is the then 53-year-old Václav Havel, playwright, dissident, chartist, a man who was still in prison in the spring of that year. This moment marks the completion of a tremendous social change in our country, a transition from totalitarianism to democracy that will go down in history as the Velvet Revolution. It is Havel who was its central symbol, who, at the end of 1989, will begin to write not only a new chapter in our history, but also his life story, which at first glance may seem incredible. Václav Havel was born into the cultural and business elite. His father, Václav Maria Havel, was a construction entrepreneur who built, among other things, the Barrandov terraces. His grandfather, Václav Havel, built Prague's Lucerna Palace, and his uncle Miloš Havel founded the film factory in Barrandov. Václav's mother was the daughter of journalist and diplomat Václav Vavrečka. The communists entered the life of little Václav at the age of 12. That's when, after the coup in 1948, they confiscate all the Havel's property and part of the family ends up in emigration. Moreover, Václav himself is also affected by the malice of the regime. For cadre reasons, he has to forget about his studies at grammar school. He becomes a chemical laboratory technician. Later, after a number of unsuccessful attempts to gain admission to a university of the humanities, he studies at the Faculty of Economics of the Czech Technical University. However, while studying at secondary school, he begins to pursue his hobby, literature. At the age of 15, he wrote his first poems and later founded a student literary group called the 633 with his friends. When Havel was 23, at the intercession of the actor Jan Werich, he started working as a stage technician at the ABC Theatre, and a year later he moved to the Na Zábradlí Theatre, first as a set designer, then as a dramaturge, and finally as a tribal author. It was at the Na Zábradlí Theatre that his The Garden Party premiered on the 3rd of December 1963. The play, in which the young, industrious Hugo Pludek achieves social ascendancy through his perfect mastery of content-emptying phrases, arouses a huge response. It makes Václav Havel one of the most prominent figures on the Czech cultural scene. He is also experiencing a joyful period in his private life. After an 8-year relationship, he marries his first wife, Olga, and their marriage lasts 31 years. Olga becomes one of the most important people around him. But we'll get to that part of Havel's story. During the so-called Prague Spring, Havel is one of the main critics of the regime. After the August 1968 occupation, he joined the student strikes, criticizing the conditions in Czechoslovakia at the time. The consequences come soon. He has to leave the theatre. Although he is one of the most respected authors abroad, he becomes banned in this country. His plays are not allowed to appear on the stage. At that time, he stays alternately in Prague and at his cottage in Hradeček. But he never stopped writing. In his play Audience, which is now a folklore, was written at the brewery in Trutnov, where he works as a laborer.
A co jste to vlastně psal, jestli se teda můžu zeptat?
Divadelní hry.
Divadelní hry? A to se hrálo někde na divadle?
Ano.
Václav Havel's really tough battle with the communist regime begins in 1977. In January, Charter 77, a manifesto for human rights in Czechoslovakia, is published. Václav Havel is not only a co-author of the text, but also one of the first spokesmen for the charter. The regime reacts quickly. Havel is arrested and held in pre-trial detention from January to May. This is not the last time. As a leading figure of dissent, he ends up spending more than 4 years in prisons by 1989. After his final release in May 89, Havel co-initiates a petition, several sentences, which is signed by tens of thousands of people. By then, it is clear that the regime is beginning to collapse. In November 1890, Václav Havel takes the helm of the nascent Civic Forum. 40 days after its establishment, the then still Communist Federal Assembly unanimously elects a new president. Václav Havel seems like a revelation after years of tehsil officials. He is direct, undiplomatic, and human. History will be made not only of the little things, like the short pants during the presidential inauguration, but above all of his achievements, including his first trip to the United States. Havel's speech was repeatedly interrupted by long applause by congressmen at a joint session of both houses in February 1990.
Když mne 27. října zatýkali, žil jsem v zemi, kde vládla nejkonzervativnější komunistická vláda v Evropě a celá společnost dřímala pod příkrovem totalitního systému. Po necelých 4 měsících k vám promlouvám jako představitel země, která se vydala na cestu k demokracii, v níž je plná svoboda slova, která se připravuje na svobodné volby, chce budovat prosperující tržní ekonomiku a dělat svou vlastní zahraniční politiku.
Václav Havel is also the first president of a country behind the former Iron Curtain to give a speech at the Brussels headquarters of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As the highest official of the presidency, he announces in Prague the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, the military bloc of Soviet hegemony in Central and Eastern Europe. For the first time in a long time, not only world political leaders and intellectuals but also celebrities want to meet the Czechoslovak president. At home, however, Havel will not have a bed of roses for long. He has to get over the disappointment of the division of Czechoslovakia into 2 independent states, which was agreed upon by the then prime ministers of the Czech and Slovak governments, Václav Klaus and Vladimír Mečiar. Later, when the post-revolutionary euphoria begins to wane and economic difficulties set in, he must also deal with the constant political friction on the Czech political scene. But one of the most difficult moments in Havel's private life came in 1996. In January, his wife Olga died. Together, they had been through all the good and the bad during the nearly 40 years they had known each other. Olga had always been an indispensable support for Havel. It was through her that he communicated with the outside world from prison, and it was with her that he consulted on whether to sit in Prague Castle in 1989. A few years after her death, Václav Havel will say that it was Olga who never allowed him to lose his self-reflection even in his greatest glory. Not long after Olga's death, Havel himself gets into serious trouble. In December 1996, doctors removed a malignant lung tumor. Although the doctors say that the operation was carried out without any major complications, the president was still on the thin line between life and death for some time. He will also suffer from frequent pneumonia for the rest of his life. At that time, the closest thing to Havel is the actress Dagmar Veškrnova. She goes to the hospital, takes care of him. Yet it comes as a shock to many people when Václav Havel secretly marries her, just a year after the death of his first wife, Olga. At the end of 1997, the Czech political scene is going through a huge crisis. The country's largest political party, Klaus's ODS, faces accusations of black funding. Against this backdrop, Václav Havel delivers a speech to both houses of parliament in Prague's Rudolfinum. Many people are disturbed, disappointed, or even disgusted by the general social conditions in our country. He began his speech at the time. While Havel speaks from the soul to some, others criticize him for unacceptable interference in politics. Nevertheless, Havel is re-elected president the following January. He will leave office in 2003 and cannot be elected a 3rd time under the Constitution. He will then return to his original profession as a playwright and writer. He will write a play, Leaving, which he will then direct into a film of the same name. He also continues to work on issues of human rights and freedoms. He rarely appeared in public at that time due to his health. An exception is his meeting with the Dalai Lama at Forum 2000. It is 10th December 2011.
Welcome, thank you for coming. Welcome in Prague. Unfortunately, I am ill.
Václav Havel smiles during the meeting with his friend, but he is visibly weakened. 8 days later, he dies at his cottage in Hradeček. The coffin with the remains of Václav Havel was transported to Vladislav Hall at Prague Castle on Wednesday, 21st December 2011 from the former St. Anne's Church, now called Prague Crossroads. Tens of thousands of people said goodbye to him on the way. The state funeral took place the day before Christmas on Friday the 23rd of December at Prague Castle, with dozens of statesmen from all over the world in attendance.